Hi guys, I'm joined by a very exciting guest. I've got SLPL My Story joining me on today, and we're going to be talking about what more can be done to improve the women's game in Scotland. Thank you for joining.
Nah, no problem at all. Thanks for having me.
So first of all, we'll kind of start with one that I got messaged quite a lot, and it was the facility improvements to help facilitate the girls' and women's games, as that would be a massive difference and help remove barriers before they even get onto the pitch. Um, I think for me, I've obviously do media of Hamilton, and I've only been to 2 games, but kind of seeing some of the different change rooms, especially like the different sizes of them. I would say even just change rooms in general, like you obviously need to have a decent space just to get changed because you've got 22 players try to get ready and stuff like that. But I also think pitches wise as well, like the standards in the women's game, kind of some of them are like a bit more better than others, obviously due to newer or whatever. But what do you think about like the facilities?
I think obviously at the top end of the game, there's been marked improvements, and I'll use your example of Hamilton. I know they play at New Douglas Park and they get the use of the facilities there, but it seems to be obviously as you start to go down the levels, and it's maybe council or public parks are getting used in those changing rooms, maybe not quite fit for purpose, especially when we're trying to sell the game to supporters and viewers, and we're trying to encourage more girls to enter into the game. Also, we want to try and raise the standards of the facilities. We want to make it enticing and encourage people to get involved and to start playing first and foremost. So I think that, like I say, there is quite a disparity from top to bottom. But then, in the same vein, there are some of the grassroots clubs that have got fantastic facilities. I'll use Gartcairn as an example. I know they're not grassroots, but from the academy level upwards, they are. They're a big community club, but they've obviously got it right with their setup. However, you compare them to maybe some of the other teams that the younger Gartcairn girls are playing against, and as I say, it's maybe council facilities. It's not ideal. How we fix that, I'm not too sure. That would probably be more from a government or a council perspective to help improve facilities, because essentially most of these clubs have got a boys and girls and a men's and a women's side, so it would make sense for everyone's involvement to try and improve those facilities. But where the money comes from, I'm not too sure for that.
Yeah. I was also kind of thinking more on the side of like kind of like the Astro pitches. Obviously, some are better than others within kind of injury wise. I don't know if you've kind of seen, but obviously, kind of where how thin the ground can be as well. I think it's also then when players are playing on it, you're risking kind of injuries. I'm not saying that all injuries are from kind of the pitch, but when you're looking into especially ACL injuries, some of the things are the pitches and how they are and kind of things like that. I don't know what you kind of think about that.
Yeah, I think this kind of falls into the same category as we were just discussing with the changing facilities. It's down to money. I've seen Glasgow women have just been granted to lay a new pitch and a 3G there, which is great, and obviously that's going to sustain the full club. It's going to be a great playing facility for the first team, but it's going to allow teams to train in good conditions. Even if the weather's bad, the all-weather 3G pitch is still going to be usable. An example from the other side that I can use, like my own club where I coach and I played for a long time, just a local grassroots club in Livingston, Muirston United. We are in the process of trying to get funding for a pitch. Our 3G pitch is out of date. It should have got replaced, but the price increases are so much that it's sometimes unsustainable for clubs to relay pitches. Ours definitely needs it. I think we're about 4 or 5 years over the due date for getting one, but it's £250,000 to lay a pitch. And when you're looking at particularly the grassroots level, raising that is a huge ask for any club. But then it's a kind of catch-22. You need the pitch to have the teams. You need the teams to justify having the pitch. But I think that's where the governing bodies need to look to get more involvement in it, and because essentially we want as many players playing as possible, and it's the only way that we're going to grow the game is by having more players, more teams, to sustain that over a long period of time. We've had a massive bump in participation figures, particularly since the World Cup and in the last Euros as well. But in order to keep that growing, then we need to invest from the bottom level. It's something that I've always discussed whenever I've been in any forums or meetings regarding growing the game. If we get the foundations right down at the bottom, then it's going to filter its way up. And as you said, rightly said about the injury risk when you're playing on either a pitch that's outdated and it's maybe got tears in it, or if you're forced to play on a grass pitch that isn't as well maintained as others, there's a risk of injury there as well.
Mm-hmm. Moving on to the next one is someone messaged saying, do you think it would help grow away support if tickets were sold by your own club rather than having to be purchased from the home sides? I think for me, I've tried to just even buy tickets for this. Is it the final at Tynecastle, and trying to just buy tickets there is like you're having to go through the Hearts website. You have to create an account. It's all this sort of like added work where like it's not Rangers doing it. It's not Partick, and obviously it is a final, so it shouldn't be their job to do it. But you kind of do wonder if tickets were from the home site, more would do it because it would involve less of you signing up to another team and stuff like that. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a better model to have the sale of the tickets going through the club and in the men's game for a final. That's how it works. There'll be a ticket allocation. Obviously, typically if it's the Old Firm teams and they're playing a team that's if it's Rangers and they're not playing Celtic, they'll get a bigger allocation just because they've got a bigger support. But for the way that the women's game is at the moment, I don't think there's an overwhelmingly massive difference in the support that, for example, use the League Cup final that Rangers would get. You'd expect them to get more support, but maybe not as big a difference if it was the men's game. If there was a men's game, Rangers might get 40,000 tickets and Partick get 10,000 and the rest go corporate. Whereas in the women's game, there's going to be a lot of people going along for the event itself. They might not support either team. They just want to go and see the showcase of the cup final. Obviously, it would then feed money back into the club. I'm not privy to the split of how the monetary side of things works when it comes to a cup final within the women's game. Like how much money do the actual teams receive from those sales? Is it split as the way that most cup games are? The gate money gets split between the two teams, and obviously that would be a massive addition to the funds for any team, even your big three at the top of the SWPL. Every penny counts. So I think that going through each club and then it gives you that affiliation with your club as well. You feel like you're contributing to your club by giving your hard-earned money to them for tickets, and you know where it's going to. Whereas as it stands right now, it's maybe not quite clear.
Yeah, that makes sense. Moving on, kind of fan safety. Obviously, it's not a game without, especially at games. When you've got the bigger teams like Rangers, Celtic, and things like that. I was at the semi-final between Partick and Hibs. I think, it was 2 weeks ago, and even just there was obviously a lot of fans to be there, and I'm not saying it's Partick's fault or anything else. I've seen it at other games where there's not been as much security as I think there should be. Like, I'm not saying it should be at the same level as the men's, kind of like that, but at the same time, you kind of need something because you're filling all this many people in to like a small stand or like a small section. Obviously, you see it at Celtic v Rangers, obviously at Ibrox, Celtic Park, even Airdrie Stadium. You see security there. So I don't know what your views on like getting even just a couple of security or even more staff maybe on at the smaller games.
Yeah, I feel like I keep repeating myself here, but it'd be a money situation, I feel, for the clubs. And with Petershill, I don't actually know what the capacity is, but there'll be a certain amount of security that's required for if it's a full house. How they manage that, I'm not too sure, because again, use Petershill as an example. You've got a lot of people standing, whether they over allocate, so if they sell all their seats, but then they're allowed X amount standing, but how they monitor that and they can plan ahead for that, I'm not too sure. I was at the other semi-final. I was at the Old Firm semi-final, and that was well maintained. Even though I think it was maybe two or three turnstiles were open, and all fans entered through the same ones. But you had a Celtic end and you had a Rangers end. There was, for me, there seemed to be enough security. But I think particularly at the smaller grounds that maybe aren't all seating. It's definitely a concern and don't get me wrong, it's a good concern to have, because we probably wouldn't even be discussing this 5 years ago, because the numbers weren't where they are. But we need to be ahead of the curve. We need to move with the times and the growth in the popularity, and we need to make sure that we're giving the best experience for everyone that's attending.
Yeah, definitely. Kind of on the same sort of line, player safety, obviously. I don't know I think it was November, was it? Obviously Becky Galbraith went down and it took her kind of 40 minutes to get an ambulance. And I obviously know that this is another money situation, some clubs can't have it, but at the same time, you kind of think having an ambulance at a game is kind of a basic thing. Yeah. But obviously, when you put money into it, obviously some clubs, I think Spartans, Hibs, they've got ambulances at the games. But obviously this game was Aberdeen, so it's not even close to Spartans for even family to try and move her, because obviously it was a head/back injury. They don't obviously want to make it worse. But I do think kind of going on to it is money, but you kind of think at the same time it's basic player safety.
Yeah, I think so. Again, if it was 5 years ago, it probably wouldn't even be discussed. But the more professional that the game's getting, it has to be professional from every aspect, and player safety should be right up at the top of that, and making sure that the amenities are there that are required if there were an injury to take place. Looking back a few years ago at the men's game, there's Fabrice Muamba, and he had his heart attack on the pitch, and there just so happened to be a cardiologist in the crowd, and he ran on and he saved his life. And since then, it was then that there had to be a professional that was specific to heart conditions, because there's been a history of players collapsing with heart attacks, and that totally changed the game. And I think that this could be in the same vein as that as the growth of the women's game is continuing, the more professional it's becoming, because a lot, obviously your full-time players, they're under contract, they're employees, and they need to, if it was any other workplace, there would need to be certain amenities available, and I think that the more professional the players themselves are getting, and what I mean by that is the fitter they're getting, the stronger they're getting, because they're training full time, in comparison to before, where they maybe only trained a couple of times a week. The stress on the body is greater, and not to dehumanise them, but they're an asset of the club. So the clubs themselves should be wanting to protect them as best as they can, because that player is on the pitch trying to perform for that team, for that club. But also, if there was an opportunity to perhaps sell a player, they need to make sure that they're in their peak physical condition. And injuries are going to occur. It's part of football. It's an inherent risk that we all take when we play. But we need to try and minimize. It's not about getting rid of risk, but it's about minimising that risk for everyone that's involved.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, yeah. I think it was Debbie McCulloch obviously spoke up about it and was like, we've got it here, we're community football. So you kind of, I think for me, it's kind of, you see the teams that are obviously big in the men's side, obviously Celtic, Rangers, maybe your Aberdeen, kind of they fit under in the Hibs. And you kind of do think they'll have more money to put into it, but like Spartans are a community foundation, they make all their money for the community and like obviously helping. But I definitely kind of agree with what you're saying. But I do think that's just a basic thing. As you said, going to work, you would have the safety. But yeah, moving on, replica tops for women's games not able to buy. So this is another one from like someone that messaged me. Now, I've obviously seen this for down south. You can obviously get the tops that have got the WSL like numbers, letters, and even the sponsors. Obviously some of them are the same, but for up here, I think Hibs started off doing it for like some people to buy to see how popular it was, but you kind of would have thought that teams like Celtic and Rangers would have kind of thought about it. Obviously, it's a minor thing. It's not essential to grow women's sport, but at the same time, these players are inspiring young girls and boys to play football, and not being able to get the same sort of top as them kind of is a bit annoying.
Yeah, I think that, honestly, I think it's just a matter of time. As we've seen the game grow, and teams have been dipping their toe in the water to see what the uptake's going to be, and it's been massive. So I think very soon we'll see. Particularly, I've seen it. Glasgow City are kind of out there on their own because they are a women's club. But I know like Rangers and Celtic do sell their women's kits and sizes, and then it's just going to filter its way down the leagues. But I don't think we'll be too far away from that one. Obviously, there was a lot of chat around Mary Earps and getting her top, and Adidas was it Adidas or Nike, whoever it was, had to come out and apologise because it was the biggest selling top and nobody could get it. But as you can see, every single week you're hearing of a team smashing their attendance record. I was speaking with the Partick girls a couple of nights ago. We've seen this Celtic the last game of last season, and I think it was over 10,000 that they had in the games at Parkhead. So if that is going to be the norm, then clubs will no doubt look at that, because they want to be seen as supporting their women's team, and then the flip side of that is that we'll support the whole game. And what I quite like, an example I always use, is they kind of put pressure on one another, because all it takes is for one team to full-heartedly go and do it. If, for example, Hearts done it, if they went and done it, Hibs would be looking across the city going, well, we can't let Hearts do it if we're not doing it. Mm-hmm. And then Rangers and Celtic would look up the M8 and go, well, the two Edinburgh clubs are doing it, we're not doing it. So it's kind of a knock-on effect. So I quite like how they do that. It kind of, fans can, to a certain degree, or teams can manipulate one another, but into doing that, and the beneficiaries of it are us as supporters, and be able to provide it for our kids, or if it's your team that you want to go and see, you want to wear that top and get that name on it, then it's only going to be a good thing for everyone, I think.
Yeah. Another one that I kind of seen was like more games on TV. Obviously, even down south, you're trying to still get more on TV, but I was speaking to someone at the weekend, and it was like down in England, you can get FA Player, which is like a free app. You can watch Championship. I think it's only about like 3 games per weekend, or maybe more. But I also agree with this. It's always on kind of BBC Scotland and Alba. I would say like try to get it onto like BBC. Obviously, this is going to take a lot of time, because obviously I think England in general are just a lot of steps above us. It's going to take time for Scotland to try and catch up. But at the same time, you just kind of want the basic stuff. Obviously, you've seen some teams use YouTube. Partick and Hibs use their YouTube channel. Glasgow City, I think it's Recast, and so do Spartans. I think they use that. But I do agree, try to get it on the bigger channels, even just more on BBC Scotland and BBC Alba would be good.
Yeah, I was seeing the comment that someone messaged you last night when we were looking to see if anyone wanted to discuss anything, and they were absolutely right. There was teams that I would watch games because they would be streaming them, and you could go and watch your Hamiltons and your Motherwells and things like that, and the games would be available. You could go into YouTube, or you just go a link through their Twitter page. But from what I've seen, a lot of that has stopped. When it comes to the games on the BBC, obviously they're catering to the masses by showing the bigger clubs, but there's a whole lot of football out there that's not getting covered. And one thing that did cross my mind is that every week you see the SWPL will show the goals from every game. They'll put that on their YouTube. And for me, well, those games are getting filmed to show the goals. So why not just show the games, or give it as an option watch the games, or at least some of the games, because typically it's Rangers, Celtic, and Glasgow City that get shown. You won't really see any other games. Obviously, you get your highlight show on a Monday night on the BBC. Sky committed to showing more games than they ever have, but obviously it's still nowhere near what's going on. And obviously there's a whole country of football here, but I think SWPL2 is a league that really gets overlooked, and the quality that's in it, and it's such a good league. When I'm on and I'm interviewing players, and I big up all the time, it's so tight. And even, for example, Gartcairn were dead and buried, and then they've just made some really good signings, won 3 games in the bounce, and they're still bottom, but they're within touching distance now, and it's a really exciting league up at the top. Queen's Park are kind of out there on the road a wee bit, but they faltered a little. They picked up a win at the weekend, but they lost previously. Kilmarnock and Livy are hot in their tails. It's really tight. Boroughmuir are in there as well. So there's definitely demand for it, I feel, but how that gets put across and conveyed to the people that make the decisions, how we go about that to aid the clubs, and put how if they give some form of funding to allow that to happen and allow the clubs to do it. I know, for example, yourself and the media team at Accies, if there was some form of budget to allow you to stream the games for free, then people would come on and watch. I absolutely guarantee that. And what teams are trying to do is tap into the male team supporters. And Partick's a team that's done really well with that, and obviously see it with the Old Firm as well. But I think that's an avenue that a lot of, probably I'll call them the smaller teams, only in comparison to your Rangers, Celtic and Cities, but maybe teams towards the bottom end, the SWPL 1 and throughout SWPL 2, they could look to tap into that, and they might not get people through the gate initially, but it's going to bring it to a wider audience, and that's what we're all trying to do at the end of the day.
Yeah, definitely. I think with because it's always kind of Celtic, Rangers, and Glasgow City, and usually kind of when they play each other, because usually they I think it was obviously the Old Firm was on TV, and then it was Glasgow City Celtic at the weekend. Most of the games, I always say those sort of games are either going to be really boring to watch, just because they're at the same level, or they're either the opposite and they're really exciting to watch, intense. But I would definitely say, and I'm not just saying this on an Accies kind of side, but I would say from watching the highlights even, you kind of see the Celtic and Glasgow City, it took, a minute for Glasgow City to score, and that was basically kind of all they really showed. Whereas Hamilton, that was probably, I would always say that was a game to watch, because Hamilton were in that position of they're at the bottom, they had to get the 3 points, they were the massive points to get, and they're at the same level. So I do agree with kind of that. And obviously the SWPL 2, I don't think I've ever really watched a game from that league on TV or even really YouTube. So I would obviously say try to get an SWPL one day, or one channel like BBC Albus, for example, and even just try it out. But obviously it's easier said than done. Another one I had kind of message was a better structure to the women's game. They said the youth setup just now is crazy. Currently at the NAP Scottish Cup has been completed, and we're almost a month into 2024 with no sign of what league teams will be in, although it's in a process of a changeover. Having no league and just a cup for the National Academy performance teams is crazy. Only 8 competitive games in half a year doesn't work. These teams need to be playing consistently to grow and develop to become higher performing players to boost the top teams. I totally agree with that. That's never enough games for a team, whether it's the top side of the Hibs Hearts Academy and stuff like that. And I do think it used to be quite not easy, but it was easier to get into the first team from these sort of leagues. Obviously, you've seen Illy Adams, Rosie Livingston, and I think Partick have just signed Amy Anderson, for example. They've come from the youth sides and they've made that. But I do agree that there's still that big jump into getting it.
Yeah, it seemed a good idea at the time, the national performance pathway, and I do think there is a place for it. However, I think it is taken away from the development of players, or it can do, because they're not playing enough games. It's quite as simple as that. Through other things that I do and working with young players that are in academies, it can get a little bit monotonous for players in particular because they're playing the same teams all the time. I don't think that it helps maybe your grassroots clubs in developing, because they're losing players, and sometimes players are sold a dream of going and playing with this club that's the first teams in SWPL 1 and SWPL 2, but it's maybe not the best setup of an academy for them to play through. An example, one of the players I interviewed, Demi Faulkner, obviously Partick captain, her under 17s team, Muirston United, won the Scottish Cup when she was there, and they beat, I'm sure it was Rangers, Celtic and Hearts on the way to win the final. So it was a few years ago, but it shows that the grassroots clubs do have the talent. They are getting taken into academies, but then at the same time, is that where we maybe need to support the grassroots clubs, and particularly the coaches that are there, to help them develop so that they can keep the improvements going within the players, and then we can have bigger leagues and we can have more diverse competition and we can have more interesting competition for the players and the people watching.
Last question we'll touch up on is about teams. Obviously, talking about money, you've seen, was it BSC Glasgow, I think they were called, in the League One, and then it was obviously Edinburgh City ladies obviously crumbled. So they said need to ensure teams aren't taking players for the sake of it to lessen the competition that happens everywhere in both sides of the game, where youth teams fold because a larger team has decided to take 6 or 7 other players to which their players never play, want to leave, and don't have a team to go back to because the club didn't have enough players to continue on. Obviously, for Edinburgh City, it was more a financial thing. Obviously, the men's are also the same. I don't quite know about BSC Glasgow, but I would definitely say for this one, it is quite annoying when a team takes so many players and they sign so many players and just don't play them. I think for the players who aren't getting played, it might make them not be in the game as much as they want to kind of be on the sidelines cheering the team on. It's not the same. I don't know what you kind of think about that.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and it kind of goes back to the last point that I made. If because you see it all the time, there'll be one club in particular that will go in and they'll say, right, we want 7 of your players, and obviously the players get sold that dream of going and playing for a big club, but then the team that they've just left folds. But then all those players aren't going to make it. Some are going to get released, and then they've got nowhere to go. But if those 7 players are good enough to play for, I'll just use Hearts as an example. If they're good enough to play for Hearts, if they all stay together with that club should then be able to compete with the national performance teams. So that's kind of, like I say, it goes back to the previous point that I made, that there is talent out there, and if we just make it an open league to allow players to develop and play against better players all the time, and then there's something to strive for, and it can be you're playing against your Hibs or your Aberdeens, but you might be a grassroots club, but you've got a really talented bunch. It's just coming back to me there, like as I said, Demi's grassroots club won the Scottish Cup, but Lauren Evans was in that team. She's striker at Livingston. Jenna Fife was the goalkeeper. There's a whole host of players that they went on to play at a higher level, but they came through at a grassroots club together. And it just shows that if you keep those players together, then teams that you might not necessarily expect, especially in this day and age, are good enough if the talent is held there. And then for me, as much as you want the best players, a coach's job is to coach and improve the players that they have. you might need to replace one or two if they fall out the game or injuries or whatever. Then you might need to go look elsewhere to bring players in. But my background's in coaching, and sometimes it is a bit of a cop out, in my opinion, just to go and take players from other teams, because that doesn't make you a good coach. That just, you're using the name and the size of the club that you're at to entice players to come along to you. When are we really developing players in that way? Probably not.
Yeah, definitely. I think kind of I think I seen it obviously at Edinburgh City. Obviously they and I was quite like sad because I know someone in that team, and obviously it's quite sad when like a team obviously does fall apart, because you always think they were like I want to say most of Edinburgh City was like Hibs under 18s from the year before. So obviously I was quite worried about where will they go next, will they get a team, and I think that's kind of another thing from a parent's point of view, kind of when a team kind of crumbles or whatever you kind of want to call it, like. But obviously, I think now all the Edinburgh City players, well, if not all, have got a team. Obviously, some went to Bonnyrigg, Rose Ladies, some went to East Fife, which I think. But obviously, it's good to see them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's obviously good to see them get a team after that. But thank you so much for joining me. It's been a real pleasure to have you and answer some of these questions that we were kind of asked. Guys, if you haven't already, go check the content on SLP on my story. Some great interviews and great guests on them. Thank you for joining.